Hello, and welcome to the Let's Talk Transformation podcasts. Today, we will be delving into how businesses can keep their employees engaged and avoid burnout, even through the bad times and the most challenging times. And I'm delighted to welcome Eric Stone, who is the author of Jumpstart Your Workplace Culture, a roadmap for igniting high performance. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to have our conversation.
Me too. It's an absolute pleasure. Eric, your passion for business and people and your 26-year career in Enterprise Holdings, which is one of the largest privately held companies in North America, had you thinking long and hard. And we were discussing it just before the show about what enabled you to lead your teams so successfully. So not only through the good times, but also through the more challenging times. And you founded Clear Path Ventures in 2018 to guide and support younger professionals and businesses to do the same. And your recent book details this journey for us, but it also details a lot more than that. So before we delve into that, can you just tell us a little bit about your story and what inspired you to write your book?
Absolutely. So I grew up fascinated with leadership. So whether it was a sports organization or a business that I would kind of follow growing up, I just always had this pull towards that. And
Mm.
went to school for business and landed in a company that helped me grow within that and to be able to practice some things. And I learned a lot of lessons from that. So
Mm.
many lessons that I felt after almost 30 years, I felt I had a message of impact to give.
Mm.
And so I created an outline and did some interviews and put some stories in and massaged it. And next thing you know, I had a book that came out. And it really probably, yeah, with all those little moments in life,
Yeah.
one of the little moments I used to get asked in interviews when I was putting in for an opportunity, hey, what is your team doing to create this unique, special sales culture, customer service culture, and overall balance? And while it was a simple plan, it wasn't necessarily simplistic to
Yes.
execute. And but for some reason we kept outperforming our peers for an extended period of time. And so I took all of those lessons learned and I wanted to give. And so instead of maybe impacting a few hundred employees, I could maybe impact 10,000 people, 100,000 people with the book. And
Mm.
so next thing you know, it's hard to believe I'm coming up on a year anniversary, October 3rd. So I'm not sure when this will air, but it's been an amazing journey.
Excellent. And well, first of all, congratulations. And second of all, I'm so glad you did. There is so much in there to learn. And I love the fact that it's given to us in lived experience, anecdotes, real hands-on operationalization of what leadership means for you, what worked, what didn't work. You outlined one of the nicer problems of outperforming your peers and, why was that happening? But there are also other challenges with COVID and the Great Recession and other things that have hit us since, where it's really interesting to look at, excuse me, what exactly you did. So I love the analogy that you use, which is, the mechanics of a car and going on a journey, and where your people are essentially the vehicle that you're taking on the road trip to success. And I think partly because, yes, it's a journey. We were discussing before, leadership is a journey we're both fascinated by, but it doesn't mean it's easy. And there are lots of different parts to that journey. And your book fills our toolbox along the way for thought, reflection, but also operational action and ways of having impact. So the first tool I'd really like to look at is the acronym LOL. So lots of love or laughing out loud, or listen, observe, and learn, Eric. So can you tell us about the listen, observe, and learn acronym and why it's the foundation of your strategy?
So it was really through experiences. The one thing I ended up doing in my career is at times you would put in for maybe another opportunity. And when I
Hmm.
would put in for those opportunities, the most value I really got wasn't looking at a financial statement. It was actually reaching out, talking to employees within that environment, talking to
Hmm.
clients or customers, and getting a viewpoint of some of the challenges. And I would ask probably up to 10 minutes of questions. I didn't want to take too much time. And I was amazed at what I would learn in a short period by getting a diversity of thought and perspective through that
Hmm.
experience. And it
Hmm.
was very eye-opening for me, and it really changed the way I would manage and lead. And too many people think they're the smartest person in the room. And what they have to remember is they may be the smartest person in the room, but they're never smarter than the room.
Yes, yes,
And
absolutely.
these conversations were great for me to understand perspective, get other people's points of view.
Mm.
Because when you're 20,000 feet up, you don't get the true story all the time.
Yeah.
And the observation was really when you would actually go potentially visit where you might be working
Mm.
and
Mm.
observing these behaviors in action, which is really, in my opinion, the simplest definition of culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And how did people react to that, Eric? You coming and actually talking to them. So, in my language, being a real person, listening to what they have to say and then acting on it. How did they react to that?
Well, I think many were pleasantly surprised. And
Mm.
I'll even use an example of I used to meet with every new hire. And we
Yes.
would have a lunch and I'd get a table of 4 or 5 people. And that was really the employee experience would start there.
Mm.
After the interview process, you'd have a new hire lunch. And the one thing I always remember is them being a little surprised because their
I
aunt,
can
uncle,
imagine.
mom, or dad never had a chance to meet one of the executives or have a
Yeah.
good conversation.
Yeah.
And so I think it was a pleasant surprise. I think it put people at ease. I think it
Mm.
built relatability and trust, which is such a key component in business.
Absolutely. I remember reading that thinking, wow, I can imagine why people were surprised and pleasantly surprised, but unfortunately, it isn't necessarily run of the mill because people are constrained by time and other things. But if I come back to the idea of a roadmap, so it's not new in business, is it? A roadmap to get where we need to go. And but for me, this is about so much more than a roadmap, which is why the roadmap is a metaphor as we established. But what does it bring to this particular approach when you mix it with this understanding that you've just touched on of human reactions to change, listening, observing, learning?
So the line is a roadmap without the human element is just direction. So
Yeah.
to your point, you can't just it's not just about the roadmap. There's
Mm,
so much more to that. And you have to navigate both the path and the people. And so it
mm.
really was a combination of the practicality, the lessons, the behaviors that get taught along the way. And I hope I get this right. There was a really good quote, and I think it was people resist change when they feel it's happening to them, and people embrace change when they feel it's happening with them.
Mm.
And so those are all the things along this roadmap that I was trying to bring in throughout the book.
And I know, if we talk about dealing with change, and I loved your metaphor of a velvet hammer. To come to this discussion, which I'm going to break a little for those who haven't read it, was in fact your nickname, I think.
Yeah.
But the idea of velvet hammer, can you walk us through that concept? Because it's building on this for me in terms of the people part of the roadmap. And can you give us an example of how it can help to create the conditions for
Yeah.
people to thrive?
So I think it was, first of all, I probably wasn't always quote unquote this velvet hammer along my learning lessons. So when I
Something you
was first
developed.
leading a few people, I probably needed to polish the hammer a little bit. But what I understood and learned about human behavior and performance was when you make people feel special, when you truly are listening, observing, and learning about what's going on, and you balance that with this high expectation and accountability. It's
Mm.
really what people want in life, especially your performers. Most
Yeah,
of the
of course.
popular things in an employee opinion survey is we don't do well with non-performers here. And so I was trying to have this human-centric approach, kind of balancing the head and the heart. And through conversation, now that could be conversations with employees, with customers and clients. I try to practice it at home. Everything I did in business, I would tell my team, don't just apply it at work, apply
Mm.
it at home. We want you to be
Mm.
great in both places.
Mm.
And so it kind of created this fair and firm approach. So the key, though, to your point is well, what's the initiative
Yeah.
that's going to make this velvet hammer come to life throughout the entire organization, not just with me? Now, I
Yeah.
understood that if I do it and the way I act will be really important for others. As they say, if you hang out with 5 people who believe deeply in something, you'll be the
Yes.
sixth.
Yes.
And so we created a form called, it was literally the 30 Minutes of Fame initiative, of which the first half of it is kind of how you doing, learning a little bit about the individual, what's going on. And then the second half, of course, was kind of a numbers-driven approach.
Mm.
And this was an initiative that really practiced what we would preach. And it was done throughout the entire region. And so that would be an example of trying to teach and practice this velvet hammer to balance high empathy with high accountability.
And I really like that because it's simple. You know, it's
Yeah.
a simple 30 minutes, 30 minutes of fame, does what it says on the tin. You're back to listening, observing, and learning again, aren't you? But I think you're also back to clarity. And I love the discussion in the book around clear beats clever. And the fact that we still incentivize clever in organizations, so how much you know, which school you've been to, which trainings you've done. So how can we come up against clear beats clever? So that's one example based on the velvet hammer approach. But, you know, given the complexity that we have to deal with today, we don't always have clarity, do we, Eric? So in your experience, how have you sort of honed that clear beats clever?
Well, I think the first is a creative, a story that I always use about clear beats clever. And I think it was Lego. It was about a Legos.
Mm,
And what they did, I don't know if you've heard about this, but they gave a set of Legos that was already built out into a little building to some
mm.
engineers. And the study was, hey, make this better. And what did they do? They added to the building. They did the same to folks in the literature area and
Mm.
arena. They gave a poem and they said, make this better. And what did they do? They added a paragraph to the poem. And so to your point, I think it's this complexity bias where the more
Absolutely.
complex something is, the more
Mm,
believable it is, the more reliable people think it is.
mm.
And when you look at it and you think of, I don't know about you, but sometimes I'd read a legal document. And when you just think of legal document in general, you talk about clear beating clever, it's 73 pages.
Yeah.
It's extremely complicated and it's drafted because it puts every possible situation
Yeah.
that could come about. And
Yeah.
it's too long and I don't understand it. And I waste way too much time trying to understand it and
Yeah.
use people who will obviously help me.
Yeah.
And so that is where we're stuck sometimes in
Mm.
corporate America. Even with technology, I'll give another example of our teams sometimes trying to be too clever. Sometimes you'll get new technology
Mm.
and it's done. I was working with an organization. I got new technology to change the customer's experience along the way.
Okay.
And it was an amazing little operation. Almost like you could call it an app, but
Mm.
like a iPad or
A
something
platform.
that
Mm.
you could kind of walk the customers through. And the problem is the usage wasn't well.
Mm.
And all everyone wanted to do was know the 5 things it couldn't do versus the 3 things it was designed
They
to
do.
do. And so clear beats clever. Let's do the
Mm.
3 things really well before we expand on 17 things.
Mm.
And that almost goes into another mantra of the distraction catcher that I talk about a little bit.
Oh yes, well, I would like to come to that. So it is interesting around this complexity bias discussion of that's the way human brains are wired.
Hmm.
And I think if I put on top of that the clear beats clever philosophy, which is I need to show how much I know to be recognized in this organization or in this team, and organizational comfort zones, from my experience, is complicatedness. So we'll just add and add and add. So if I put complexity bias plus complicatedness as a comfort zone, and I put it in needing to sound clever to get promoted or to get recognized, that leads to a lot of distractions. It leads to a lot of double work. It leads to a lot of diluted accountability in my experience. And that's why I love the clear beats clever mantra, because it will start a discussion. But the distraction catcher was something else I wanted to come on to. So can you tell us how the distraction catcher works? I love the fact that it was linked to, you know, the Native American dream catcher and that type of idea, because it's a little bit more creative than just it isn't what it says on the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
But can you tell us how it can help this sort of diluted accountability and this need to complexify everything?
So my logic was always it's like when you have an employee. I truly believe people don't start with an organization and want to be terrible, and you
Yeah,
know,
okay.
and I think they truly want to
Mm,
perform at the highest level. And what happens in leadership positions is sometimes again there's so much information that is getting thrown at you. People don't know how to dissect it and put it in the right
mm,
bucket. All of
mm.
a sudden feeling overwhelmed, anxious, stressful. I can't do my job. It allows excuses to come into the game. And I
Yeah.
think that's very dangerous. And so I was always big on how do we avoid the noise? How do we become this distraction catcher so we can truly succinctly go after these 3 to 5 key priorities that individual is responsible for? Let's
Mm,
build some traction, some momentum. We know people are at their best when there is
yep.
clarity.
Mm,
And so I call it actually the ABCs of communication go into this distraction capture. How do you know when to amplify?
Mm.
In other words, what is my setting to truly amplify a message? What is my setting to truly buffer a message? To synthesize it, to make it small. I
Mm.
don't need the 42-page email. I don't need the 5-paragraph thing. I
Mm.
don't need a complex policy or procedure. How do we try to buffer things
Mm.
and make it a little bit less, or seemingly taking the pressure off the
Yeah.
basketball?
Yeah.
Just a little relief, I guess. And you see it all the time. It's the biggest distraction are the flavors of the week within organizations. This
Mm.
week it's all about the new technology, and the next week it's all about this. Our sales is down. We've got to go, go, go. Then the customer service drops, where it's all about this customer experience. And then, well, we lost some employees. It's all about, and the employees just start to feel like, wait, what's important right now?
Mm.
And so trying to find a way to get those 3 to 5 key initiatives throughout your organization by learning this ABC approach, simplifying things, clear beats clever. And so it
Yeah.
all comes together into an approach. We don't need any more meetings. We don't need more emails. We need to give some empowerment so our teams can actually achieve the big things they need to achieve.
Mm. And so we don't need more meetings, we don't need more emails. I loved that discussion in the book because, in fact, we need more space, don't we? In terms
Yeah.
mentally and also sometimes physically, but team space or mental space or head space to think about how we can do things differently. And the ABC approach, I really like that because it allows you to just take distance, put your thoughts down and think about what you need. But that's just, I could do it once, Eric, and then maybe I get stressed again, and then what? So how do you run that through the culture? Because if I look at a car, you can replace the windscreen wipers and then suddenly they go again. And you can replace them and suddenly they go again. So what does that mean? And how do you manage to create something more sustainable culturally?
Yeah, really good question. And for me, the simplification was, hey, why are people struggling being successful? And
Mm.
there were a few things that kept popping up. They didn't feel they had the time, and they didn't know how to have a difficult conversation. So, okay, great.
Mm.
I have feedback through listen, observe, and learn. We're
Yeah.
gathering information that's saying, how do we get not just me to be a distraction catcher, but throughout the organization? And so we would come up and we did as simple as it is, some time management techniques that would allow people to look at their month and schedule it out a few weeks before the new month would start. And you
Okay.
would make sure you started with the 3 to 5, we call them big rocks, the 3
Yeah.
to 5 big initiatives. If we do that, great, and nothing else, we're in really good position. And then you start to fill in some others. We used to call that the sand. You kind of fill those administrative things in. And so it was teaching people of truly how to win the week, well, the day, the week, the month was a really big thing that became part of our training class for new management individuals. And also the how to have a difficult conversation. There is nothing more frustrating. I have 11 nieces and nephews all in the workplace. They all have their groups of 5. It compounds I hear stories during July 4th or a holiday
Yeah.
or whenever people get together about the frustrations people have with the workload or what's going on or with their boss. And what I don't find enough is just actual training approaches that
Yeah.
will allow the team to be successful. I've removed an excuse, and I hate to use a strong word, but it was an excuse.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes it could be reality, but those are a couple simple things that I think organizations fall short of. Even having an
Mm.
effective meeting, I think it's only 21% of
Oh,
leaders are
yes.
trained on how to have an effective meeting. So of
Yeah.
course people will hate meetings.
Yeah. Yeah, because they're not effective and
Not
then
effective.
and they're not particularly motivating, are they?
No.
But I think difficult conversations are uncomfortable, aren't they? So, as to go back to the beginning, leadership is hard. It's worth it. It's great. It's exciting, but there are difficult parts to dealing with human beings, not just in the workplace, but across the board. And we just need to get comfortable with feeling uncomfortable. I don't think anybody ever gets up and think, oh, great, I'm going to have a difficult conversation. But to come to your point about cultural resilience, which is so important, that's one way of building cultural resilience, isn't it? This discussion around equipping people to have different conversations in the workplace. Can you tell us a little bit more about cultural resilience and how you developed it intentionally, Eric? Because the really important word in everything I read in your book was intentional.
Yeah.
Intentionally doing this, intentionally creating habits, intentionally creating stay interviews, for example. I'll come to that later. It's the first time I've heard of stay interviews. So can you tell us a little bit more about cultural resilience?
So to me, it was understanding that inevitably unexpected things are going to happen,
Yeah.
and having our team understand that I will not have all the answers personally. I mean, I'm going to need my team to help me develop kind of a plan every once in a while. I don't have every answer, which is really important in
Yeah.
leadership.
Yeah.
And whether it's the Great Recession, it's the pandemic, it's your technology exploded, it didn't work. There are so many
Mm.
things. And to me, when you build this practical roadmap that I write about, what I love about culture and this resilience is it becomes a shock absorber. So when
Yeah.
bad news happens, the culture is this shock absorber that allows my team to continue to push through because they believe and trust in what's going to be said next. You've
Mm.
had organizations who excelled in the pandemic because they truly trusted leadership that they had the best interest of what was going on.
Mm.
So for me, culture was that big shock absorber that we need to build for when things do go wrong. And when they go right, hopefully we've cleared away everything so they can execute a lot of the things.
Mm.
And it was truly trying to build a solution mindset. How do we try our best
Yeah.
to not tell me we need more people, but how do we get more people? What are ways that, and you're pulling this information. And so those are reasons why it was so important. All of the stuff I write about was to build some resilience as things go along, because life is challenging. Just
Mm.
when you think you have it,
Yeah.
something
Something
unexpected
happened.
happens. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's human nature. That's just
Mm.
reality, unfortunately.
Mm. And can you tell us a bit more about the stay interviews, what they are,
Yeah.
how regularly you run them, and what purpose they serve? Because I think this for me was a simple action that if everyone put in place, it would really change the experience, the employee
Yeah.
experience.
And this was just one of the potential ways that we would use to truly do that listen, observe, and learn.
Mm.
Everyone knows the theory, listen, observe, and learn makes sense, but what's the
Yes,
initiative tucked
exactly.
under there? So it's within the fabric of your organization
Mm.
and it is in alignment with your values.
Mm.
And so what I was fortunate is I had someone who was an amazing HR professional. And I would sit down monthly and we would go over a number of individuals that the HR manager would go out and actively have conversations with. What initiatives are working great? How's your career path going? What would you change if you could change one thing? Just questions so we can continue to learn about what's going on. And if they didn't like it, we of course would say, what's the
Yes, of
solution
course.
to that? Give me a good place to go with. And then we would meet again once those were done. So we'd set maybe 10 to 15 employees. At the end of the month, we'd have a conversation of what are you hearing out there? And it was just one of those levers for a department head to go out to the team and try to be of service to. And we got amazing feedback. And she
Mm.
was amazing connecting, which was really important. So
Yeah,
people would open up. And
yeah.
they did believe because, well, we couldn't change everything all the time. If we didn't change it, we'd communicate great suggestion, not going to make the list this time, but
Mm.
keep sending them. And
Mm.
when we did, they would see it. And so they felt heard, inclusive. And
Yeah.
so it was just a small thing, just one of the things that one of the department heads would do to make a connection to the team, to provide information, data, and it
Mm.
really was influential in helping us steer the ship.
Mm. And it's small in time. It's a small moment that matters, but it's normally it's just entry, interview, and exit interview. So there's no sort of proactivity or anticipation of what might. Then you get to the exit interview. It's like, oh, why are you leaving? So, yeah, so I
A little
really,
late. Yeah.
yeah, I really like that. But I really liked it because, as you said, it brings you data as well, qualitative and quantitative to measure what's going on in your culture. Because one of the questions I get asked the most, and I'm sure you got asked the most, was how can you measure culture? How can you measure leadership? How can you measure the ROI of coaching? All these type of questions because it's softer subjects. And I know that you put together a framework for actually tangibly measuring culture, which we call the check under the hood process, in keeping with the car analogy. Can you tell us about that and how it helps you to tangibly measure
Yeah.
culture? Because I think that's the biggest question we all get as leaders. How do you measure that?
So I'll start in the beginning of just reaching out to CEOs of organizations,
Mm.
thought leaders, my own experience, and pulling data from a company. It might be Gallup or
Yeah.
others who
Yeah.
supplied data. And one of the things that stood out, especially in the book writing process, I would ask a CEO, hey, first of all, what is culture to you? How do you measure it? And usually it was crickets.
Okay.
It might have been an employee opinion survey or something like that, but there was nothing really too deep.
Mm.
And so I wanted to find a way to create a baseline,
Yep.
a scoring system, just like in academics, there's a GPA.
Yep. Yep.
In finance, there's a credit score. In other words,
Yep.
it's not the only thing you could do, but it would give me a way to check the temperature of the organization or a pulse of what's going
Mm.
on. And what was very clear for me after all the research is in my six point inspection, two of the biggest things were what is the customer satisfaction or net promoter score, and what was the engagement of the organization. And those to
Mm.
me were the things that truly, from all the research and conversations, were driving business outcomes, whether they were customer service, sales, market
Mm.
growth, penetration, whatever it would be. And so I came up with a few qualitative and quantitative things that were really important based on the research and my experience of looking at companies and the own company I was part of, and
Yep.
who were the places that were really succeeding and what was the commonality. And so the 6 point inspection came up, and
Mm.
it was a good baseline for organizations. You plug in some numbers and it kind of spits out what your score is. You could do it quarterly, biannually. It really is up to you, but it is something that will provide
Mm.
a score that we're always
Well,
so desperately looking.
Eric, do you just want to walk us through the 6 point system for inspection, what you put in there?
Yeah, well, I did a weighting system, and the two were the satisfaction or promoter score, the engagement
Mm.
scores. Those are things you could actually
Mm.
truly get numbers on.
Mm.
There was also, those were double weighted, and then the other four, one was just, of course, retention. Engagement and
Yeah.
retention are different. You could still hang around, doesn't mean you're engaged. You
No,
know, you're the
absolutely.
person who never
Absolutely.
leaves.
Yeah.
There's a famous song the Eagles made. You can check out
Yes.
anytime you want, but you can never leave.
Absolutely.
So, so and then you have a decision to do either profit or market share, because some are
Mm.
startups, some are tenured
Mm.
places, and then there is a values-based
Yeah.
type of piece. In other words, it's really important of who you are, these values that you stand for, and do people
Yeah.
truly understand internally what your values are about? And of course, the diversity and inclusivity. What are you trying to do to develop a diverse leadership group? And so you take those and it gives you something to look at. You could look at each individually, you could look at them all together, and it was a nice way to reflect.
Okay. And for those of you who haven't yet read this book, there is a complex scoring system behind it that is explained and that gives you the
Yeah, right.
dashboard from the 6. But it's very interesting because you not only do you get tangible results, you can also do it, redo it,
Yeah.
quarterly, monthly, whatever you want to do. And that becomes your single source of discussion around
Yeah.
what's going on in the organization. But so what does it mean for the measuring the culture? The process of looking under the hood and just seeing how we should measure culture more particularly.
Well, again, I think that the whole logic of it was the score is one thing. It's great to get the score. The bigger thing of where most people fall short, it isn't the strategy of, it's the execution of.
Yeah,
And so the
yeah.
score, again, the score was, it's a number. I'm a 3.2 GPA student. What does that even mean
I mean,
sometimes? So, the good thing is it gives you something to say, hey, we're at an 82, or we're in the green. I use the red light, green light, yellow.
yeah,
We're in a pretty good place. But the real bigger thing is the concepts of the book of okay, now
yes.
that you have this information and there is a starting point, or we're making progress, or watch out, red light, we got to be careful here. That's where the rubber meets the road, for, geez, another car analogy.
Yes.
But that's what really matters. And so I always loved culture for many reasons. I was a leadership junkie, but I felt everyone has a strategy. Culture helps you execute the strategy. And so,
Mm. And I love the fact that you make culture something that isn't fluffy. Because,
yeah.
if I say my definition of culture is the way we think, act, and interact around here, that's true. However, what does it mean? And like you say, what does it mean for execution? I agree with you when I hear your words, Susie, but how are you going to operationalize it? So that's what I liked about the 6 point inspection system, is it puts tangible data behind it, also for people who are more skeptical around, how we measure it, what it means. But you also touch on the sort of not very comfortable and not very talked about topic of emotions. So, you know, the emotional state of the corporate community or the business, and the fact that it's an important indicator of its success or failure. How have you seen that play out, Eric, in your experience? And I have to ask you your thoughts on why are we still so emotionally illiterate in organizations then, if it's so important, which I agree with, it is so important.
Well, I think a few challenges have clearly come in and put workplace culture front and center.
Yeah.
You know, there's 5 generations in the workplace, and some could
Yeah.
argue the alpha generation's coming in. You
Yeah.
know, my youngest son is an alpha.
Yeah.
And so they each value different aspects of what's important to you
Mm.
in work. Younger generation, maybe not necessarily motivated by the financials, but
Yeah.
certainly motivated by the purpose-driven work. And you're trying to mix this, not probably a better word than stew together, but you're trying to mix everything together. And then, of course, the flexibility debate comes, where are we supposed to go in person, remote, or hybrid? What is the
Mm.
best way to be innovative, collaborative, productive? And so everything got put even more front and center as this happened. And
Mm.
everyone is trying to put the pieces together, and I think are struggling at times trying to find out, how do we get this thing under control? And we were even talking before we got on air here about there's
Mm.
a leadership gap.
Yeah,
And I think
absolutely.
that's a thing that we have to be very mindful of, which is
Mm.
why a lot of my trainings were behaviors driven. How do we help with
Yeah.
behaviors, the
Yeah.
human behaviors? If in fact we're struggling with our team understanding each generation, are we doing some sort of generational perspective training? You know, what are the
Mm.
things that we've uncovered under the hood?
Yeah.
What are we trying to do with this stuff? Because everyone grew up in a different environment. You know,
Mm.
the
Mm.
younger generations, maybe born into 9/11, they had the Great Recession, watching their
Yeah.
parents maybe struggle, then the pandemic. It's all digital and technical now. It is different.
Mm.
And
Mm.
so it is finding ways from a behavior to understand people. I love using the word looking into perspectives. Are you getting
Yeah.
a good perspective of things? But for me, it came down to, how do we get these emotional intelligence things
Mm.
trained? You can train empathy. It's one of the emotional intelligence, but
Mm.
how do you do that? You can train communication.
Mm.
It is one of the emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's something we're gonna have to be very mindful of. And it's hard. I hear
Mm.
stories all the time when I'm talking to
Yeah.
people about some of the challenges
Yeah.
within the business environment that they're
Mm.
with, that make
Mm.
anxiety, stress, and all that stuff. They take it home, they vent it, and it becomes
Yeah.
very unhealthy. So we've
Mm.
got to be very careful.
And like you say, yes, we can train it, but then how do you help people execute it on a daily basis? How do you support that process? Because I can learn something in a training in a safer space or in a space where I'm completely focused and I have the space. And then I get back into this stressed environment and, you know, often I need hand holding or someone to just help me sort out exactly what that means in this particular environment or in this particular case. So, Eric, time is running, but what is the most transformative thing you have ever done in your career? And this is my assumption. I'm going to say writing your book is probably it, but I'm putting that aside. So if I don't count writing your book, what is the most transformative thing you have done in your career?
That's a great question. And I would say, and it would relate, let me first, because I always like to go personally and professionally. I
Mm.
think it relates to, I have 3 kids,
Okay.
and sometimes you have thousands of conversations with them about something.
Mm.
And all of a sudden, the 1000th time, it connects and it changes the way they think, act, and behave. And it goes to the same in corporate America, where I've been fortunate to work with thousands of employees.
Mm.
And I almost wonder if one of my transformational moments I don't even potentially know about, because I
Yeah.
had this conversation, I had this in-depth conversation, and it changed the way not only hopefully they did something at work, but as important, did they get better in their personal life. So there's probably some I don't even know about.
Mm.
If I had to pick an event within my career in a team environment,
Mm.
is my last stop I had is taking over a very struggling culture, a region that had talent, for whatever reason, wasn't bringing everything together. Matter of fact, there was disbelief, which is a very dangerous thing.
Yes.
No one thought it could be done. It's harder here.
Mm,
And trying to turn the battleship was really challenging, and I had a lot of difficult times. And I
mm.
call it death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Yeah.
Small victories, winning, 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 celebrating, building traction, to the point where we became one of the more prestigious regions within the company over a long period of time. And we celebrated from a region who never won anything, quote unquote, from an award standpoint, to when we won our first of many that we ended up winning. We did a booze cruise, they call it.
Oh, yes, I
And
remember.
on the booze cruise, what was, I'll never forget, is as we're all having a good time, dancing on the boat, having fun, in the background, there was a chant,
Mm.
and it was our call letters of what our region was.
Oh,
And
yes.
all of a sudden, you would hear this repeated, and this vibe, it just was the moment where I said, we have something really special here. And
Mm.
so I think that experience from the beginning to that moment really was special, something I will never forget.
Yeah, and that filled the tank, if I take the car analogy, to go the next 100 kilometers, if I
Yeah,
understand correctly. Yeah.
that's right.
Okay, excellent. Eric, would you have a last call to action or recommendation for our leaders listening who want to start improving their culture or creating the conditions more intentionally to improve their culture?
You know, I actually write about it. We didn't even have a chance to talk about it, but there are these 5 factors of employee engagement I really would recommend leaders incorporate within their organization. I'll do them really, really quick. The first is, what are you doing to create a strong relationship with the
Mm,
management team, whoever you manage, and what is tucked under that within your organization? What are you doing to clearly communicate your goals and expectations? And a few things under that. What are you doing to provide the right material, equipment, and information in order to achieve the desired outcome? What are some things that you're doing there? What are you doing to encourage personal and professional growth? Number 4.
hmm.
And then last, of course, is what are you doing to reward top performance? And I think if organizational leaders can even just do that,
Yeah.
I think that would be a great start. There's a lot of nuggets throughout the book. I
Mm.
always tell people who want some guidance, I don't need to charge you. Just pay $29. You can get a couple of ideas. You know, I don't need anything after you to buy a book and maybe you'll get some takeaways. So
Oh yeah, more than a couple of ideas. But I will leave our listeners with that idea to go and read your book, and also particularly those 5 factors. And there are lots of other details under there as to how it could work and what it could
yeah.
look like. Eric, thank you so much for coming and sharing your insights, what's in your book, and your thoughts on leadership and culture. Where can people find out more about you and what you do?
I think the easiest thing is on LinkedIn.
Okay.
I'm certainly not a social media guru yet, but LinkedIn is certainly a platform I've grown into, and I'm beginning to get my Instagram thanks to my daughter at ClearPath Ventures _. But
Okay.
those are the easiest if you want to go on social media.
Okay, I love the intergenerational collaboration aspect of
That's
that.
right.
Yeah, I will put both those links in the show notes so that people can find them easily. Thank you, Eric. Thanks again for a great conversation.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.